Good morning, everyone. I hope you're feeling well and not too icy and cold this morning. It's day 7, so let's see what's behind day 7. Here's our day 7, and behind it is, just going to come in, oh, when the camera's back to front it's quite difficult. It's a little bush and it's got flames coming from it. Now I wonder if you can guess and think which story that would be. Yeah, you're right. But let me put some context. Joseph had taken all his family to live in Egypt, and Joseph's family grew and grew and grew. God really blessed them in Egypt. They had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and it grew and grew. And Joseph and Jacob's family had all died, but the family that God had chosen to be his line was still very, very strong. And Pharaoh at the time really didn't like that. He didn't like the Hebrew people, so he actually made them all into slaves. And they were an unhappy people, and God saw that. And one day he spoke to a man named Moses, a man, incidentally, that God had already chosen. I remember we've talked about the story where the baby is put in the basket to keep safe. And that's the same man that grew up, and he lived in the palace, so God had his hand on him all the time. And he was out looking after some sheep, and suddenly he saw a bush that was on fire. But it was a strange fire, because the fire wasn't burning the branches and the leaves, it was just the flames. And then he heard a voice, and it was God's voice. And God said, Moses, I have heard the people cry, and I know that they're in pain, and I know that they're unhappy, and we're going to do something about it, but I need you to help me. Now Moses was a bit afraid of that, and he thought he couldn't possibly do it. So God said, well, your brother Aaron, he'll be able to help you. You need to go to Pharaoh, and you need to say, God says, let my people go. Well, Moses had to go. It took him a long time, and Pharaoh kept saying no. Pharaoh didn't want to let all these lovely people, well, not so lovely in his eyes, but lovely in our eyes, people go, because they worked hard. They were the ones that were doing all the building and working for the Egyptians. So he said no. And God said, but my people need to go. So he turned all the water in the River Nile to blood. Moses went back and said, now look, let the people go. And Pharaoh said, well, if you turn the water back, if God turns the water back, then I will. And so God turned the water back to normal water, but Pharaoh changed his mind. And Pharaoh did this 7, 8, 9 times. God sent frogs and gnats and flies and hailstones and illness and darkness and a few other things. You can look them up. But finally, Moses went back and said, now the final thing is there will be death if you don't let the people go. The oldest child in every family will die unless you let God's people go. Well, Pharaoh still didn't do anything, but God had a plan. I love it when God has a plan, don't you? God said to all his people, all his family, he said, if you kill a lamb and put the blood of the lamb over your doorpost, tonight when death comes upon Egypt, God will see that there is blood on the top of your doorpost and that the lamb has died, and so nobody else will need to die in that house. And that's exactly what happened. That's what they did. And that night death came across the whole land, and there was so much crying and wailing. Even in Pharaoh's own palace, his son died. And that night Moses took all his people. They packed quickly, they left their bread flat, and they walked out of Egypt, not ever to return. It wasn't an easy journey. We can read later on that it took over 40 years. Now, it wasn't that far to go. It shouldn't have taken that long. But the people that Moses was leading, they just didn't keep God's rules. They kept wanting to do their own thing. They saw God do amazing things while they were there. They came across a river, a great big sea called the Red Sea, and they couldn't go across it. They couldn't go through it. There wasn't a bridge. Pharaoh's people were chasing them, and Moses just put his staff out and the water all parted, and they were able to walk through the middle. they had no food with them after their food had dried up and they'd used it all. And God provided food every morning for them. He provided fresh water for them. And yet they still kept complaining. God even took Moses up into a mountain and gave him a set of rules for everybody to live by. We still use them now, the 10 Commandments. And so many of our rules in Britain and around the world come from those 10. And yet, for some reason, they kept ignoring God. And God said, well, if you're not with me and you're not following me, then you can't actually go to this new land that I've promised you. And that was really sad. And that's why it took 40 years. And it reminds me that I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be doing something because I'm not quite right with God. I want to make sure that I'm listening to God and I'm doing what he wants me to do, because I know that he's got something really special for me. Just like these people, he had a really special new land for them to live in, but many of them didn't get there. And we'll find out tomorrow who does get there. Bye for now and have a really good day. See you tomorrow.